Welcome to Conversation with the Governor here at the GBN studios in St. George's. I am sitting down this evening with the Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Timothy N.J. Antoine. He has been on an outreach program this October going through the islands of the Eastern Caribbean within the financial space, meeting officials, government officials and interest groups. And part of his outreach is a conversation where journalists get to speak to him, and you, the public, will also get your chance later on in the program to speak with him. We'll be taking a look at things like climate resilience, and the climate change has been a big conversation for us and a big worry for us. What's happening on that front in terms of financing our mitigation and adaptation methods? We'll talk about youth development in the region and what's available there. There's also been a lot of concern about de-risking and banks pulling out of the region. I'll also ask the governor about that. Governor, welcome home and welcome to GBN Studios. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you.
Thank you, Kalistra. Good evening to you and to our viewers, listeners in Grenada, the ECCU, and around the world. It's a delight to be back in the space.
Well, it certainly is a tumultuous time in the world right now, and the Eastern Caribbean is getting its fair share of the impact of all that's happening. One of the difficulties that we are facing has to do with banks pulling out of the region and issues of de-risking and corresponding banks' difficulties there. And so how are we to deal with this? Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley, she has spoken extensively on that difficulty. Where are we with that?
So the matter of the withdrawal of the Canadian banks, that is to say their sale to indigenous banks, has occurred. I mean, over the last 3 years, we've seen significant changes in the banking landscape of our region. And I think, understandably so, people are concerned. A lot has happened quickly. You have situations, for example, where someone would have left a bank and gone to another bank only to find out that the old bank has just bought a new bank. So they're back in the arms of the old bank. These are realities that we've experienced. And so concerns have arisen about, for example, is there enough competition because there's less choice? The truth of the matter is there are concerns in some countries, some more than others. Take Montserrat, for example, there's one commercial bank. One. So there's no competition, and there's a large credit union. In Anguilla, 2 commercial banks. In Dominica, 3. In Grenada, 4. Most of our countries, member countries, have at least 4 commercial banks. So in truth and in fact, although there has been a reduction in the number of commercial banks operating in the space, there is still reasonably good choice, meaning you have competition. And I think we have to also recognize that in this moment, our indigenous banks now control about 2/3 of all banking assets in the ECCU. They are owned by us, Grenadians, Social Security, NIS, Post Authority. You know, these are who the commanding heights of our banks are now owned by the people of the region. That should be a matter of pride. Now, of course, to whom much is given, much is required. So by the same token, even as we celebrate the fact that our banks have now taken increasing responsibility for the banking sector and the development of our region, they must maintain and continue to improve their standards, for example, in corporate governance, risk management, credit risk, for example, management, and so on. But I also have to say that there's been another big change in the sector that precluded or preceded the sale of those Canadian banks. That is the rapid rise of credit unions. So that today, when you look at the financial landscape, we're not just talking about banks, we're also talking about credit unions. And in fact, the credit unions, so here's the thing. Indigenous banks are doing what the Canadian banks used to do. Credit unions are doing what some indigenous banks used to do. So there is choice. There is choice. Here's the thing. Look at mortgage rates in Grenada now. The typical loan, a mortgage, say a 20-year mortgage, would range from a low of 4% to maybe 6.5%. Kalistra, that is a lower rate than you get in the United States right now. as a consequence of the rise in interest rates in the US this year, a 30-year mortgage, which was 3% in March, is now 7% in the United States. So someone who was paying, say, $1,400 per month in a mortgage in the US is now paying $2,000.
So is it because of the competition that we are seeing lower mortgage rates?
That's the point I'm making. Competition amongst our banks and financial institutions have driven down interest rates, including for mortgages, and I gave that as an example. So all I'm saying is that while I understand the concern about the rapid change in the banking landscape, I'm also saying that there is adequate competition, maybe a little less choice, but adequate competition amongst the bank, in fact, fierce competition to get customers. And that has redounded to the benefit of the people of Grenada and our region, because you're getting lower rates, for example, on mortgages. Just an example.
Now, you mentioned credit unions, and that the credit unions have quite honestly been a thorn in the side of commercial banks for a while. They make the case that credit unions do not operate under the same regulatory framework as banks, and that they are now offering services that mirror commercial banking services. How is the conversation with the credit unions going? I know that attempts were being made to look at some sort of regulation there. Where are we with that? That conversation is ongoing, and I think has to gather steam and come to resolution. It's been a long time since. It is, but such is the nature of these things. You see, there are different views in the movement about the way forward. So I speak to credit union leaders all the time. And there are progressive leaders who will say, we recognize that we're doing more. In Grenada, credit unions control 1.2 billion in assets, about $1 billion almost in loans. I haven't checked recently, but I think 50,000 people are members of credit unions. That's how big the thing is. So these people recognize, given the importance of credit unions, given their increasing size and scale, they need to make sure that they're at the top of the game and they be given the requisite oversight and also support. Then there are those who say, no, too fast. They want to treat us as banks. We're not banks. And I think the movement has to make up its mind what it wants to be and to do. If you want to play in the big league, the Premier League, because as far as I'm concerned, credit unions are no longer in the Bush League. They're in the Premier League. Then they have to expect a higher level of officiating. I also believe that they should get support from the central bank to help them to realize their biggest potential and impact for customers. So for example, we'll talk perhaps later if we can about the credit bureau, about deposit insurance, about access to clearance so that credit unions could do checks in the system the way banks do. Those are things that we are discussing with the bank's credit union, with our central bank. And we've given every indication that we're prepared to support our credit unions to get in that area. I have been a member of a credit union, 2 credit unions for a long, long time, 25, almost 30 years. And so I recognize the role and value of credit unions. But I do think we have to have an honest conversation, Callistra, about the direction of credit unions. If they want to be a connected international system, that comes with certain responsibilities, like the issue of combating money laundering and terrorist financing, like the issue of dealing with de-risking or correspondent banking relations. Mm-hmm. You can't ignore those things as they cut you off. So those are the honest conversations we have to have with the leadership and members of the credit union and decide how we're going to resolve these tensions, these trade-offs. Go bigger, then more responsibility. If you don't want those responsibilities, then you have to stay under the radar and you have to operate it in a smaller way. Most credit unions I know want to operate in a bigger way because they want to be able to offer more services and benefits to their members. And I could understand that. But credit unions have changed. In the old days, they were closed bond arrangements. If you're a teacher, it's teacher's credit union. Nobody else could be a member of that credit union. Today it's open. Anybody can join. That's true for many of our credit unions. That has completely changed the complexion and to some extent, I would argue, the character of the credit union. And it's still very important. Credit unions are a force for good. I have maintained that. But we do have to have an honest conversation about what we want to do with respect to the movement. And I think we have to get away from this
credit union versus bank, I think it's a kind of false narrative, to be honest. It's a far more nuanced, far more complex discussion than credit unions versus banks. And most people are members of both credit unions and banks.
But I think that one of the concerns, because the regulatory framework that governs them doesn't seem to be moving.
So that's the thing.
In line with
yes.
with
I hear you.
growth.
I hear you. You're raising a very valid point. And I'm saying to you, I'm in agreement that the regulatory framework has to keep pace with the evolution of the sector. Jack Welch, classic Jack Welch, if the rate of change in the market is faster than the rate of change inside, the end is in sight. If the rate of change outside is faster than the rate of change inside, the end is near. The end is in sight. It means you have to adapt to the operating environment. If not, you become irrelevant and you go out of business. And I think we have to have those honest conversations across the region. Frankly, not just in Grenada, across the currency union.
Now, on the issue of banking, though, and with the indigenous banks now getting greater control and a greater share of the thing, one of the concerns is the human expertise to deal with matters, and whether or not there is a risk there. Do we have the human capacity to now take on that kind of responsibility? Any training programs that are designed to develop our human capital in the banking industry so that we can properly manage what, as you said, great responsibility?
Yes, so their training is ongoing, but I think in some cases with the acquisitions, the indigenous banks also acquired some of the talent from the Canadian banks. So there are people who worked, some, not all, who worked for these Canadian banks, Scotia or RBC, who are now working in an indigenous bank. So they've brought their skills, their experience, their expertise to that indigenous bank. But you are correct that the capacity needs to constantly be enhanced. Banking is just very dynamic, and you have to constantly up your game. So that is certainly something that we want to see. I'll mention briefly, Callistra, that the ECCB has been encouraging our commercial banks to come together to do what we call a shared services for risk management, compliance in particular. You look at the Canadian banks, large as they are, they actually collaborate on a few things. Shared services, things like compliance, internal audit, even IT. You can't compete on that. You could compete on customer service and certain products, but when it comes to these core things, you want to do them together to reduce cost. One of the reasons why Scotia was the most profitable bank in our region is because Scotia did exactly that. It had a shared service arrangement, a center in Barbados or Jamaica or Trinidad or somewhere, and spread those costs across 20, 21, whatever countries. And so they were able to reduce their unit costs of operation and drive up their profits. In the case of our indigenous banks, they don't have that luxury. They're operating in one country with a few branches, not across countries. So the cost of operating, the unit costs, are higher for indigenous banks than they are for the Canadian banks. So we've said to our indigenous banks, come together, create these shared services, which you can all buy or purchase, and then you compete on customer service and some of the other things. But keep that tight and minimize the cost by having some kind of economies of scale. That is a discussion that is ongoing with our indigenous banks.
Banking fees. There's been a lot of complaint from the public about banking fees. Any plans to look at that?
Yes, we've heard lots of complaints. The truth is right now there's no provision in the law. So when people say, what is the central bank doing? Why are you not tackling this? The law doesn't give us that permission.
Who can tackle it?
The most we can do at the moment in the Banking Act is to say to the bank, what is the reason why you're doing this? Have you given your customers adequate notice? And notice means 30 days. That's it. We can't say yes, we can't say no for any fee adjustment. So how are we going to tackle this? We need to bring legislation through the Monetary Council, which are our finance ministers, which must then be taken to our parliaments. And what we're proposing, to answer your question very specifically, is the establishment of an Office for Financial Conduct in our central bank, ECCB, to oversee financial market conduct and consumer protection. So whether it is a dispute over services, the breach of a treaty or customer charter, fees and charges, if X an issue, there'll be somebody, there'll be a financial ombudsman, for example, in that office with staff to help address these things. And our proposal is not just to cover banks, but to have that Office for Financial Conduct cover all financial entities. So insurers, credit unions, money transfer, you know, payday agents, payday loan facilities and so on, that whole financial sector, to make sure that the customers are being treated fairly. Because market conduct is essentially the relationship between a financial institution and a customer. And that right now is not being adequately covered in law.
And how far out are we for seeing that being set up and beginning to serve?
Well, it's going to take a little while yet. We went to our board in September. Our board approved the idea and gave us permission to now take it to our Monetary Council. So on Friday of this week, we're taking it to our Monetary Council. If we get that approval, then we're going to develop it further and bring it back to Monetary Council in full form for approval. So we're moving hard on it, but it's going to take a while for us to get the approvals, to finish the consultations, draft the legislation, and bring it to the parliaments. But that is our intent.
And how, once you have such a facility in place, what sort of changes or improvements do you anticipate or do you expect to see within the financial services space?
Well, certainly transparency, accountability, meaning that there will be a watchdog and there will be someone that persons can go to, customers can bring their complaints to, where they are aggrieved or they have a complaint. Right now, they call us central bank. We may make some calls, but we do not have any teeth in the law.
You don't have the authority.
We don't have the authority. So I think you will expect, and we should expect, to see better service, protection for financial consumers once that is put in place.
Now, there's the issue of low loan deposit ratio. I think it's just over 50. Banks not lending, really. What's going on there, and what can be done to increase the flow of credit to businesses?
Yeah, that's a long-standing issue. When I was PS Finance, we were battling with this. This has been going on for 20 years. It's a long-standing issue.
And you hear people saying, oh, I can't get, I want to do this, and I can't get money, and I want to do that in my business.
The bank's not lending. The banks. So here is the thing. Well, I prefer to talk about what we're doing, because as I always say at the ECCB, and I encourage my colleagues, we have a choice: curse the darkness or light a candle. We always choose to light a candle. So two things I want to mention since you've asked. One is the establishment of the Partial Credit Guarantee Program. What is that? In October 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, we launched with Eastern Caribbean Partial Credit Guarantee Corporation a partial guarantee program. Essentially, it means for small loans, we started at $300,000. Today is $750,000. Loans up to $750,000 can be guaranteed, 75% guaranteed, by this corporation. The loans are made by financial institutions, guaranteed by the corporation. And that is intended to help small businesses that cannot get access to credit because they either do not have collateral, do not have a track record, or they do not have the right connections. A lot of small business people have great ideas, but cannot fulfill their dreams because they cannot get access to credit. They don't have the connections, they don't have collateral, they don't have a track record. So we launched that. So far, in Grenada, there are 3 financial institutions participating: Republic Bank, Grenada Cooperative Bank, and Grenada Development Bank. Last time I checked, actually this morning, when I asked the CEO for an update, she provided an update indicating that so far Republic has issued 12 guarantees, or to Republic, 12 guarantees, Cooperative Bank 1, GDB 1. For a total...
Given the length of time since, because I remember the launch of that program, that does not seem like much.
2 years. We need to move faster. So this is
was it affected by the pandemic?
Pandemic affected everything. But we do feel that we should be further along with the program. What we're discovering is that people don't know about the program. The average person you ask about this, I'm sure tonight some people are hearing about this program for the first time. But it's been around for 2 years. So we have to market this thing. So $30 million have been set aside for this program. At the moment, guarantees of around $4 million have been issued so far. Of that, Grenada has almost half of that, around $2 million. And 75% means about 1.5 million of the 2 million have been guaranteed. That, we believe, is a very important program to get small businesses access to credit, to help the banks themselves lend more to people. Because sometimes you go to a bank and, yeah, it's a good idea, but the person has no collateral. You're on the margin, and that guarantee program is intended to get them over the line. Because now you know, as a bank or credit union or GDB, 75% of that loan is guaranteed by the institution. Now, there's a fee, of course, that the financial institution has to pay the guarantee corporation. It's 1.5%. But there are three products. There's the normal guarantee, there's startup capital, there's working capital. We believe that that is important to help small businesses grow and to help banks lend more to businesses. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. And so I'll ask people, having heard the program tonight, ask your bank about it. And let me just add, to move it faster.
Maybe also some funds can be set aside for PR and promotion of it.
Yes, so
it's an excellent
correct.
offer.
You are correct, Kalisha, and I'm sure if you put in a bid, you might be considered to help with the promotion. Just saying, I'm not making that decision, that's a corporation. But seriously, you're right. And they're making efforts now to bring some additional resources for marketing. I was also advised today that to help the banks move the program along faster, the corporation, Eastern Caribbean Partial Credit Guarantee Corporation, is hiring a consultant to help the banks in terms of preparing their applications, to help the small business people to prepare their business plans, and to provide some additional training. So make it easier for the banks to make the application for the guarantees. That's where we're at now. Stay tuned. I hope next time we speak, we could announce that a lot more guarantees have been made, because that would mean small business people getting access to credit. The second thing I'd mention quickly is the credit bureau. We do not have, in the ECCU, a credit bureau. Barbados has, Trinidad has, Jamaica has. If you go to the US and the UK, they have credit bureaus or credit registry.
Why haven't we had one up to now, though?
It's one of those things we've talked about for a long time. We have not delivered.
So are we now on track to setting it up?
In December, we are going to launch the credit bureau in the ECCU. We've already licensed the operator. The headquarters is going to be in St. Kitts at this time. The CEO has been appointed, and Grenada has passed the legislation. That's the credit reporting bill. That was the enabling legislation, and the regs, the regulations, and we will start. What we know from our research is that everywhere a credit bureau has been established, access to credit has increased. Everywhere. Everywhere. So we have every expectation that when that credit bureau is launched, we will see credit extension rise in the ECCU, Grenada and the ECCU. So I want people to stay tuned for that. December, and of course next year you'll be hearing a lot about it with the promotion and so on. Very important part of our attempt to build a modern credit ecosystem, because they're missing pieces. I mentioned the partial credit, now the credit bureau. These are two key missing pieces that we're adding, and I think that will help to answer your question about why the banks are not lending more and why, you know, the loan to deposit ratio is so low. So
improved access to financing and capital.
That's correct.
But the depositors' monies in these indigenous banks that we have here, it seems as if they're doing a lot of investment outside, and I think one of the worry is that depositors' funds are being risked, and there's also a situation where a lot of the financial services, particularly in Grenada, in insurance, for instance, the profits are shipped out and the investments are elsewhere. You don't see a lot of investments. For instance, with the collapse of CL Financial, when we look here in Grenada, all we see is one building on Young Street that everybody's fighting over to get their share out of. There's nothing here that we can put a lien on. Any concerns there about investments outside of the territory?
You have to strike a balance. The majority of the investments need to be in the country, in the currency union, but not all. It's a simple basic principle of diversification. Take Social Security, NIS, for example, and we've had this debate in Grenada for years. How much money of Social Security, NIS, should be invested in the country versus overseas? And the actuary has been very clear. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. You invest in one country and a hurricane wipes out the country. What happens? Then people will say, well, how could they be so foolish to put all of their investments in one country? Don't they know that hurricanes pass through sometimes? So what the actuary, I haven't checked recently, but when I was in government of Grenada, the actuary recommended that 80% be invested in the country, 20% outside. And I know efforts were being made to do a little diversification to make sure that not everything is in the country. And that's true generally. So for banks, most of the investment of our banks are in Grenada, in the currency union, but they do take a portion. It varies. Some banks have a very small portion, one or two banks a little bit more, that they put outside to help diversify and to generate some returns.
And are these investments being monitored to see whether or not they're being put in high-risk investment?
Well, they are not supposed to do that. And as a regulator, our central bank demands that they have certain risk management frameworks, protocols around these investments. They cannot engage in certain high-risk activities. It is obviously up to the banks, but we do provide guidance, the ECCB, as a regulator of commercial banks, on this question about the investment of depositors' funds, essentially any investments that they may do abroad.
All right, Governor, let's take a break here and now, and we'll come right back. This is the conversation with the Governor on GBN Television.
When the ECCB took the bold step to introduce Dcash, the people of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union were at the heart of this decision.
It's about creating opportunities.
It's about connecting family.
It's about linking friends.
It's about changing the way we do business.
It's about transforming lives.
A journey to a place where none have gone before will not be without its challenges.
But challenges will not deter us from our goal. It's about me.
It's about you.
It's about all of us.
So join us and let's make history together.
Welcome back, viewers. I'm having a conversation with the Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, our very own here in Grenada, Timothy N.J. Antoine. I'm Callistra Farrier. Governor, the strength of the EC dollar, and I think every time I interview you, I ask you, every time I interview people, I ask about the strength of the EC dollar on when I did business files, if you remember.
Yes.
Are we still as strong as we were? There are concerns that it was backed so heavily that, and it wasn't necessary, and that something could have been done to make ease the space so that people have more access.
Yeah, so our dollar is strong. Currently backed 90%, and that's a remarkable achievement when you think about what we've been through over the last 5 years. Hurricanes, Irma Maria, pandemic, volcanic eruption in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, inflation, and historically low interest rates by the Fed, 0 since March 2020. To have all of this happen to these islands and to have our currency as strong as it is, 90% back, is a remarkable achievement. And what it says is that the policy, long-standing policy, preceded me. We maintained it obviously since I assumed office, of maintaining strong reserves has been a wise decision. Because how we think about it is that these reserves are an insurance policy. An insurance policy which is peace of mind when you have a shock or disaster. We've had multiple shocks over these 5 years, but our currency has remained strong. Imagine for a while we had no money coming in from tourism, no foreign reserves, no foreign exchange coming in from tourism. The currency remained strong. That's a testament to the arrangements that we've put together in these islands. And now we're expecting tourism is rebounding, and the economies are recovering, and we will see the backing go up even further in time. It will take a little while to get back up to the 95s and so on, but it continues to be
There's
very,
some
very strong.
who maintain the position that it is not necessary to have it backed that strongly.
Yeah, I hear that, and that's why I said I believe that it has been a wise decision to maintain high reserves. We did a study in 2018 where we were looking at this issue because people ask us all the time, well, maybe you're back too high, maybe you should lower it a little bit. And we came to the conclusion that maybe we could take about 10% and invest, you know, a limited portion, say about 10%, and invest in some economic development. But then shortly after that, the pandemic broke. You see what I mean? And
then you were like, well, you see?
Well, at least we were high. We didn't, you know, so we didn't have to worry about, you know, we hadn't taken any extra risk or anything like that. So yes, the debate always goes on about whether we're too conservative, whether we have too much reserves, and whether we should perhaps, you know, drop it a little bit and do other things. All I would say is that the shocks keep coming. And to manage those shocks, the buffer, you need to have strong reserves. That has served us well in this period, and therefore we will continue to maintain a strong dollar.
And the shocks keep coming. We're looking at inflation now. We're looking at reduction in economic growth, although we're looking at, I think it was just over 6% for the ECCU.
Yes.
But is that being adjusted?
For 2022, it's still going to be about 6%. Next year, probably about 5.9%. Of course, we have to see what goes on in our major trading partners. In all probability, there will be a recession in the UK next year, possibly the United States. Typically, a recession comes with a lag for us. So we are not projecting a recession in Grenada or the currency union next year. But certainly, the global economy is slowing. Why is it slowing? Because major central banks are raising interest rates to try to get inflation under control. So the Fed, the US central bank, has been dramatically, rapidly increasing interest rates. Interest rates were 0 in March. Today they are 2.5%. And when the Fed goes in November, I'm sure it's going to be probably another 75 basis points to get to over 3%. By the end of the year, that policy rate by the Fed could be close to 4% or even above. Next year, it may even get to 5%, because until the Fed can get inflation under control, it will continue to drive up interest rates. That's the reality that we're facing. And unfortunately, the Fed has made a decision, and in fact, all major central banks, that in this period, there will be some pain, but it is better to take the pain now and get inflation back under control than to have inflation get out of control. The last report a couple of weeks ago, inflation was still around 8% in the United States. They want to get it down to around 2%. So how long will it take? What will it take? Some people argue it may have to get to about 5%. You know, in the last time inflation was so high, the rate went up to 20%. I don't think it will go that high this time. But inflation has been very stubborn, Callistra. Very, very stubborn. And of course, the situation has been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But supply chain issues before that related to the pandemic. And the truth is, until we're able to get inflation under control, we're going to see that sort of situation. So the slowing of these economies. And let me just say, there's nothing the ECCB can do about inflation. We import inflation. Why? Because most of what we consume, we import. We are pegged to the US dollar. That over time, long time, has generally given us the benefit of low to moderate inflation. But in this period, we are importing inflation. We import food, we import fuel, we import fertilizer. All of these things have risen significantly. So we need, and we are dependent on the Fed, the US Central Bank in particular, to get inflation under control.
So one of the major ways that we can deal with our inflation issues in the region is to simply begin to produce more.
Absolutely. We need to feed ourselves more, to be less dependent on others for food, for a fact. And I was making the point this morning in a social partners meeting. In 2 years' time, well, 2024, less than 2 years, Grenada will be celebrating its 50th anniversary of independence. How could we be independent and be so dependent on others for food? Let's make a point of doing something about that. So the challenge before Grenada and our currency union is to reduce our food import bill by 25% over the next 3 years. The food import bill in Grenada is around $253.4 million at the end of last year. Can we get that down by 25%, which would be around 190 million? And if we're going to do that, we have to do three things. We have to tackle meat, we have to tackle grain, rice, cereal, what have you, and so on. We have to tackle fruits and vegetables. Because these three food categories account for about 50% of all the food that we import. Somebody told me today, I hadn't checked the numbers, that in chicken alone, somebody made a point, $70 million we spend on imported chicken. That's meat. So to tackle the food import bill, you got to tackle food, meat, grain, like breakfast, cereal, oats, whatever, and fruits and vegetables. But we have to do it.
And then I suppose what we have to tackle, and that's where the guarantee program with the banks come in, because we need businesses to be financed in order to produce more. Correct.
So, and I mean, we had a very lively discussion in the cabinet when we presented the cabinet on Monday. The cabinet was very engaged. We were very pleased to be able to present and to hear from the cabinet. And we had a very lively discussion about some of these issues, because it's complex. I mean, to do food, we all agree, yes, we need to reduce, but then you have to look at a number of things. The inputs, the cost of fertilizer. You have to look at the question of pre-deal larceny. You have to look at the question of insurance. If you have a loss due to a disaster or pest and diseases, how do you indemnify the farmers? How do you protect them? You have to look at taste and preferences. Some of us like foreign, and we have to change our tastes and acquire a taste for local. We have to look at our trade policies. The fact of the matter is, local food are not cheap. Ultra-processed food imported, not good for our health, are far cheaper than our locally grown, organic, healthier foods. So there are a range of issues that we have to look at, a raft of issues to tackle this question of food and nutrition security, but we have to tackle it.
Because, for instance, the locally produced poultry, that's what I use. I do not buy imported meat. If I eat imported meat, it's probably at a restaurant or something. And the price difference between what's imported and what is locally grown, produced here is so vast, it's so different.
It is.
You know, and I'm looking at, even with poultry, that something drastic has to be done so that more people are able to even afford to buy locally produced poultry.
That is correct, because even when people consciously want to eat healthier, the pocketbook constraint, the budget constraint. What can my small budget allow? And I may want to go eat right, but my budget wrong. It's not cooperating.
It's not.
So I have to
even
end
for
up.
Fish is $8 a pound or something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's $8 here. I could tell you up north, it's $12 and $15. So thank God for the fact that you can get fish in Grenada for $8 a pound.
But we import fuel, and the boats need the fuel to go out.
Correct. So it's a complicated ecosystem, but we have to tackle these issues. And and certainly I got the distinct impression the Minister for Agriculture is keen to do that. He will need partnerships across government and with the private sector. And obviously our central bank will do our part. The very least we will do is to track and report on progress on the food import bill. So we've already prepared a developer tracker by country to see whether we're making progress on this issue.
Well, I'm already eating local poultry, and I'm making lime juice because I grew my own lime tree, Governor. Wonderful.
That's a great example, and a good example for your children as well.
Yes.
Very, very good.
Now, speaking of children, youth development in the region, we're all talking about youth and what we need to do for the youth and the opportunities that are there for them. Is the central bank leading on anything that is going to drive youth development in the union?
We certainly are doing several things. Obviously, a lot more needs to be done. So I mentioned the partial credit guarantee earlier because, to be honest, we really believe youth entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, women in business, youth involved in the cultural arts, the industry, the orange economy, they need that support. And we want to have that partial credit guarantee help a lot of these young entrepreneurs. So that's one example. Secondly, we do scholarships and internships. So since 2017, we have done what we call a Bright Sparks program, where we provide internships at our central bank for students interested in a career in IT. Off the top, I know Grenada has had 2 students, Lyndon Jacosal and Janelle Brathwaite. They interned with us, and they were so good we kept them, and they now are now permanent staff, and they're doing very, very well. And if the parents of Lyndon and Janelle are listening tonight, you should be very proud. You raised your children well, and they are serving, and they are serving us very well, and they should be, and they are making you proud. But we've had about 15 such interns across the currency union. We also do a scholarship for what we call a SPY scholarship for students interested in STEM. Again, typically we take them out of TAMCC. Because to get into, if you want to do a career in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or STEAM, which is with the arts, it's for the arts, you need to prepare to get into these top universities. It's very competitive. So what we do is we provide 2 scholarships every year for a summer program put on by the Caribbean Science Foundation, typically it's held in Barbados. And 2 of our students go there and get prepared to then enter one of the big schools, whether it's Virginia Tech, Stanford, MIT, to pursue careers in STEM. And again, we've had, I believe, certainly 2 Grenadians, I don't remember their names now, who benefited from that. So those are things that we do in youth development. I also want to mention the fact that this year we launched a challenge, a Climate Data Resilience Challenge, where we put some money in, $100 and something thousand overall, to basically help our young people who have ideas around climate and want to create some use data analytics to create some kind of model. So we had some finalists, we gave cash awards, and now we're helping these young people develop those prototypes. Potentially, they might be able to sell them as apps eventually and maybe make some money. But we look for innovative ways. And then the last thing I'd mention is a big project called the Caribbean Digital Transformation Program, funded by the World Bank and our governments. And we're covering under that digital skills, digital finance, we're doing telecoms, so ECTEL, and we're also doing cybersecurity, curriculum app impacts. And again, what we're trying to do is to position the region, and especially our youth, to be participants in the digital economy. Because, Kalisha, the reality is that the global economy is going digital. And if we're going to be able to play in that space, if we're going to not just have a fighting chance, really, to be viable, we have to be digital. And as I always say, not mere consumers, but producers in the digital economy. It's so easy to go on Amazon and click, and buy. That's consumption. What are we selling on Amazon? What are we selling on Amazon? That's production. We need to not just buy, we need to produce and sell, bring in foreign exchange, create jobs. And so that project is intended to help us build out the digital economy. So I'll just stop there because I know we have lots to cover and the time is short, but those are some samples of what we're doing. Okay,
you know, the new administration in St. George's is very big on pushing the digital economy as well.
Right.
So, you know.
And that's a good thrust. I think that's important. I think that's very important. Revolutionize government. Digitize everything in sight.
Well, the Prime Minister said to me he had not signed any paper since he took office.
Correct. I was in Cabinet Monday. I didn't see any paper.
Well, I mean, Cabinet was paperless from preceded this administration.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
And so they've maintained that. But the idea of digitizing government, going across government and just making sure, because what you're doing as well, you're making services more accessible to consumers, to customers, to the citizens. So it's not who you know. Getting a service in government shouldn't be having to make a call and who you know inside the bureaucracy. You should be able to get it because you're a citizen. And the best way to do it is to put all these things in digital form. I am so proud of Inland Revenue now that I can stay in St. Kitts and pay my property tax, for example, online. Very seamless. I mean, I did it earlier in the year and I was so proud. I sent a note to one of the senior officials saying, thank you, keep up the good work. Because it was really pleasing to see that kind of development in Grenada, and frankly, we need to see it across the currency union.
But then one of the challenges we have, though, is human capacity.
Yes.
Our the level of training that's available and that has been accomplished so far.
Yes.
We're very far behind, it seems.
We have a lot of work to do, and unfortunately, brain drain doesn't help. brain drain doesn't help.
Well, everybody wants to work for a better wage.
Everybody does. So God bless those of us who chose to stay in our countries and work, because some of us had the option to work overseas and we came home. And I don't have anything against those who didn't, but I thank those who stayed. Now, I was given an example in Washington a couple weeks ago. In the United States, in the New Jersey, New York area, 1 in 25 doctors were trained in Grenada through St. George University. 1 in 25, that's a big number, a big contribution by this small country to the healthcare in the United States. I ran into a lady who was at Yale University. We started talking. She came to ask me about Dcash or digital currency. Where are you from? Grenada. Oh, I have a sister who did medicine in Grenada. And these stories go on and on. But we have shortages of doctors and nurses. The capacity issue. Because obviously people could earn more overseas. And we have to continually improve our systems here so that we could retain our talent. Because that has been one of the problems. And to bring back people from the diaspora to come home. But obviously one of the big issues is healthcare. So that's something we have to tackle as a country, because it is tied to the issue of getting talent and retaining talent. We've lost too many people. Too many of our best minds are outside of Grenada. And they want to come home, they want to contribute, but they will tell you, boy, I can't make it on this salary. I have obligations. I have to take care of my family. I have commitments.
Patriotism versus your pocketbook.
Well, as one guy told me many years ago, you can't take patriotism to food land. Meaning you have to pay when you get there. You know, there's a limit to that. But certainly I hail those who have stayed home, the patriots. And the truth is, with digitalization, a lot of people who are in the diaspora can contribute. Look at what we found out during the pandemic, how everything changed. And work, play, school, study, shopping, church, everything, worship was online.
Everything went online.
And we got through, we survived. So the moral of that story is that we could get more creative in the use of our talent in the diaspora. And we need to do that. And we need to do that. We can't keep lamenting what we don't have. We need to leverage what we have, but get creative about getting that talent. So they may not be all coming home, but they could work from there. And by the way, telecommuting is in, working from home is in. So you may have some people who can actually come back to Grenada and live with a job in the United States.
But then our telecommunication system is going to need to,
right.
To be able to have the capacity.
Internet has to be 5G, not 3G or 2.5G, 5G. And our healthcare has to be of a certain standard. I think those two issues in particular will affect whether people make that choice. Because some people can choose now to come back to Grenada and live and work, keep their US job or their Canadian job, work from home. Because work from home means you could be anywhere, including your country of birth. And during the teleworking period, we did that for 2 years at our central bank. Many of our staff, ECCB Grenadians working at ECCB, came home and worked from home. Around there, they were close to their families, their loved ones. We gave them that dispensation. And across the members, I mean, other countries, because we have members from staff from all our member countries, they had the option if they wanted to work from home. Most of them. Obviously, if you're in security, you have to be on the campus. But most of our staff had that opportunity if they needed to.
And another upside to that is that we need to increase our population so that we have greater economic activity. And having more children is not necessarily the formula that we want to follow. That will take a while.
We need to increase our population, but we need to increase the skills in the population. It's not just increase the population.
I mean, it's not just everybody come. It has to be strategic.
You have to bring skills. Because to raise the productivity and the growth of this country, skills are required. If you bring people who have no skills and who are dependent on the state for survival, then we're making a bad situation worse. So I agree, many of our countries could do with more people, frankly, but more skilled people. More skilled people, because it will address the exact point you made earlier on about some of the capacity constraints, the brain drain and the loss of talent. To get talent into our public service, get talent into our private sector, and to just generally make the country move faster.
You know, I've been wondering these days, when I think about, for instance, Grenada's National Transformation Fund, where the funds from our CBI goes, and I wondered, would it be feasible for a government to decide we're putting all of this into education alone because we need to make such a big jump there, or we're putting all of it into healthcare because we need to make the big leap forward? Is that something that a sensible government would consider, or is that sort of
well, I don't think they have the luxury of
voodoo economics?
No, Kalisha, I don't think any government has the luxury of putting all the NTF, the National Transformation Fund, in one area. There are priorities, and the government of Grenada will have to decide. So, for example, we discussed with the cabinet the theaters of transformation, which really align very well with the transformation agenda. Renewable energy, food and nutrition security, broadband connectivity, human capital development, healthcare. So there are areas, you can't do one. To tackle this issue, you need an ecosystem. You have to do several things at the same time. That's the reality. You cannot do one single thing. You train all the people, they have the skills and they have no internet. We're not going anywhere. So you have to do a thing, but you have to prioritize them and recognize if you sequence them well, they can reinforce each other and build and help create a virtuous circle in terms of how you create an internal dynamic for growth and transformation in the country. So that's what you want to see. But certainly, what should be the priorities? I think the government has some clarity, clear ideas on that. And I'm sure in the next budget you will see some of that.
And in your discussion with the cabinet of Grenada, you got a good sense and feel of the transformation agenda? Because some people say it seems to be a bit elusive at the moment.
Well, I think the government is going to, and I expect, will articulate increasingly in clearer and clearer terms, in concrete terms, in granular terms, what that means. And not just what it means, but how we're going to measure success. How will we know that we've gotten there? Our ideas which we presented in terms of our presentation, I think aligns with some of that, and I think some of the metrics there could easily be used, but it is for Grenada to ultimately determine what transformation is for Grenada and how we're going to measure it year on year on year. So, but take food and nutrition security as an example. If we agree that we have to reduce the food import bill, that we have to produce more of our food, then there are specific things that will follow. What we do with the planting, the support for farmers, what we do with our trade policy, you know, I mentioned some of the issues earlier. But ultimately, are we creating more jobs? Are more people getting opportunities? Are we, you know, those are things you can measure. So my view is that the conversation has started, and it is for Grenada to elaborate that, articulate that, and give clarity to how we will measure success. And I think you are asking the question as a member of the Fourth Estate. I'm sure the Grenadians will have a question, but it's time for coming together. What we want to see, and certainly we encouraged when we spoke to our social partners today, is a coming together of social partners. Labor unions, business, civil society, churches, with the government, and of course the citizenry, all our citizens and residents, to be able to move that transformation agenda forward. A child in a primary school must know what that transformation agenda is, and may be able to tell you 1, 2, 3, transformation. That's how deeply rooted and grounded this idea must be. And I think it requires a narrative, a compelling narrative. It requires regular reporting and accountability, so that we are clear on the journey. The bus has started here, we go into Sautez, and we know, okay, we're involved now.
We know who we stop and pick up along the way.
Right. And there's clarity there. So I think now is the time to have those sort of conversations.
You know, I was, during an interview on my program recently, we were talking about how the transformation agenda, it needs the kind of spirit that existed during the 79 to 83 revolution in terms of people's participation and how everyone was on board, and it was a mantra, the productivity and that kind of thing. That spirit again.
I agree. I think that's a good analogy, although obviously the circumstances then are now very different. But that energy,
the energy,
including from our youth, including from our youth, not just our youth, but including from our youth, that energy is important. Kalisha, to get anything done serious in life, innovation, transformation, you need energy. There's talk, there's ideas, but to move from ideas to reality, you need energy. That's hard work. That's constant effort. That's discipline. Day in, day out. I tell my children all the time, discipline is a price for the future you want. What future do you want?
That. Discipline, the price for the
We
future.
have children. Discipline is the price for the future. Not what daddy wants, not what mommy wants, you want. If you decide that's the future you want, what price are you prepared to pay? You go to a football game, you have to pay a price, unless you go over the fence and everything, and you know, and so on. My point is, discipline is the price for the future we want. And you are right, we need to bring that energy now, that patriotic fervor. So even the fact that we have the 50th anniversary coming up, how do we rally as a country around that milestone as a country to really elevate transformation, for example?
You use that auspicious date to catapult the thing and to create.
You're just leveraging what you have, you know, and that is available to us. And it's very important that our youth are engaged and fully involved. So you are correct.
All right, let's take another break here. I'm Callistra Farrier, and I'm having a conversation with Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Timothy N.J. Antoine. We'll be back in a moment.
When the ECCB took the bold step to introduce Dcash, the people of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union were at the heart of this decision.
It's about creating opportunities.
It's about connecting family.
It's about linking friends.
It's about changing the way we do business.
It's about transforming lives.
A journey to a place where none have gone before will not be without its challenges.
But challenges will not deter us from our goal.
It's about me.
It's about you.
It's about all of us.
So join us and let's make history together.
Welcome back, viewers. I'm here at the GBN studios with Timothy Antoine, the Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. He's doing an outreach going to all the islands of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union over the last few weeks. It's Financial Literacy Month as well, October, yes, Governor?
Correct.
And he's been reaching out. He's here in Grenada. He's come home for this stop, and we're having a conversation about financial issues and economic issues in the region. Viewers, you can call in this segment now with the Governor. Following that, you can call in or text your questions and comments to the Governor. This is a participatory program, and so you can have your say as well and have your queries addressed by the Governor. Governor, climate resilience, the big boogeyman for us. We have rising sea levels that can be a threat for us. We're in the hurricane belt, so most storms and most severe storms and all kinds of worries that we have. We have to build differently, we have to build better, and all of this is going to cost money. We're looking at debt crisis for developed countries. How do we navigate this? And I don't know if you've heard of the Bridgetown initiative that has been crafted now that is seeking to achieve financial justice. So we're looking at financial justice and climate justice. How do we as small island developing states get our share and get our recognition and our due for the concerns that we have?
Well, I think we have to stick together and make strong advocacy. And I expect going into COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, that the Caribbean's voice will be very loud and powerful and united on this issue of climate justice and the need for us to get access to climate finance. We all know it, but it has to be repeated. We are among the lowest emitters, but the hardest hit. And unfortunately, the resources promised under the Paris Agreement, that $100 billion per annum per year, those resources have not been forthcoming. And so we have been stymied in our efforts to build resilience. We need resources for adaptation, for building climate smart agriculture, for building climate resilient infrastructure. The fact of the matter is, when you build a sea defense now, you have to build it 3 or 4 feet higher than you normally would because of sea level rise. Those are real needs. And so when I was in Washington recently, for example, I was advocating very strongly for support for our region with respect to green finance, for the development of a green finance market in the Caribbean. I gave the example, in 2020, green bonds issued in the world, $270 billion, not $1 issued in the Caribbean. How could that be? Listen to this. An IMF study in 2018 showed that the frequency of natural disasters in the Caribbean is 7 times higher than anywhere else in the world. 7 times higher. And the damage and losses from these disasters is 6.5 times higher, 6.5 times higher than the global average. That clearly makes a point, Callistra, of our vulnerability and the huge needs of our region for financing to build resilience. And so we must go into COP very strong, but we have to continue our advocacy. And we need to have this coalition for climate justice. So I know going into COP27, one of the things that they will be taking, controversial for some, but appropriate certainly for the cause, is this issue of damage and loss assessment. That some compensation be made, some climate justice. Because what we're seeing, and we talk about natural disasters, but we see extreme weather events. These sharp floods out of nowhere, unseasonal, that create damage. Every few weeks you get a harsh rain and you get some slides and you get some roads and bridges damage. These things add up. All of those are climatic effects. So we have to continue to make a very strong case for climate justice in respect of financing, grants in particular, soft loans for us to do adaptation and mitigation. Mitigation is the lowering of carbon emissions, like something like renewable energy. So ECCB has been lending its voice. Everywhere I go, I advocate for a region, because at the end of the day, it's an existential threat. If we don't tackle it, we won't survive. We won't be around. And we have to do everything to protect our future.
It seems like we're appealing to conscience rather than self-interest. And I don't know if conscience really resonates with these developed countries who are...
Well, it's both.
Really?
It's both. If you self-interest says that if the climate gets so bad and the countries become unlivable, then you'll have climate refugees. They'll be heading for the border of the United States. That should focus people. I don't think they want any more refugees. So I'm just saying we have to look at various angles. There's a conscience issue, there's reparations, there is self-interest. And in some cases, I think what has happened even in the United States and Australia and other parts of the world, where some people have denied climate change for a long time, wasted time denying the existence of climate change. They have faced the harsh reality of weather events themselves, whether it's floods. Look at what's going on in Texas some time ago with the freeze, the deep freeze. Look at what we saw in Florida. You know, that they now come to the recognition, this is real. And I think you've seen, the U.S. government trying to take steps to really create some funding to really reorient the U.S. economy in respect of a low-carbon future. But it's an uphill battle, no doubt about it, but we have to fight. It's survival. It's our survivors at stake. So we have no choice but to continue to make the arguments, shame them. So I give an example. This is a little central bank, our little central bank. We've invested in renewable energy. 60 to 70% of all our electricity now comes from solar PV. And when we install our battery storage, which we get in next month, we'll go to 100%. Last year we saved more than $1.2 million in our electricity bills. Small central bank. But we've taken that to have the moral authority to make the argument. If we could do that, small as we are, you could do better. You large emitters could do better. So we have to call them out. One of the things I also, and I'll end here, one of the things I also advocated in Washington recently was for the IMF and the World Bank to begin to, on an annual basis, report on the flows of climate finance to the Caribbean. And the deliberate reason why, the reason I'm asking for that is to shine a light, to expose the fact that we are not getting our fair share of resources, and to demand accountability. When you shine a light and you create accountability, I think we will get more traction in respect of resources for this region. So different angles to try to get to a just solution for this climate challenge that is facing our region and facing our world.
Now, Governor, before we take calls and callers, we are coming to you in just a minute. The issue of the crisis that we have with air transportation in the region, what kind of impact is this even having on the economies as well?
Well, it's certainly having a very deleterious or adverse effect. The truth of the matter is that our tourism would have been rebounding even faster if we had better air connectivity. I mean, I think some of us would have seen, even with our summer festivals, our carnivals, some people couldn't get a flight, or the flights were too expensive. To get to Grenada this week, I had to go through Miami. Overnight, both ways, cost and time. You know,
I thought they would get the RSS to fly you into. You're the governor of the central bank.
The RSS is reserved for VVIPs. I'm not one of those. But let's move on. But in all seriousness, it's a serious issue. And you cannot have a regional integration movement where people can't move, where they cannot connect. So it is hurting us because 1/3 of all arrivals in our region are intra-Caribbean travelers. So in case of Grenada, Barbados, Trinidad, you know, wherever they're coming from, and they're spending, but they have to get here. So that is a serious issue that has to be tackled. I know our Prime Minister is considering the matter. I know Prime Minister Mitchell has indicated that, you know, he's prepared to go it alone if he has to. Obviously, I think he wants to go regional through the regional process. But the truth of the matter is that we have to do something about this.
Well, LEA 2020 is on the table as well.
LEA 2020, there are some other potential possibilities they will have to determine. Because you have to learn the lessons of LEA and avoid those mistakes. You have to have a transparent and sustainable framework. Some routes are profitable, some routes are not. What routes are you going to cross-subsidize? And there are some routes that are not profitable, they are necessary for connection, because air connectivity is a regional public good. It's a bridge. In that case, government has to make a contribution. So that formula has to be clearly articulated. The operation has to be efficient. The management and board has to operate along commercial lines with whatever support the government is giving. Make, you know, the right decisions. You have to look at the regulatory side. You have to look at the issue of tax fees and charges, TFCs. 52% of our airfares are tax fees and charges.
Ticket tax.
Those issues have to be. So it's not a simple issue, but we know what the issues are. And I
find they're moving, given the gravity of the situation, the importance, it's a public good. And I find they're moving pretty slow on it.
Well, it's just challenging. I mean, there are unresolved issues with LEAT. The severance pay, there are other things, and so on. So that is there. Certainly for the shareholders of LEAT, the Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Vincent and Grenadines, Dominica. Then there's LEAT 2020, you know, which has 2 planes. Some days 1. So you have to obviously augment the fleet. Then there are discussions about what should it look like. Should we have multiple airlines involved? If an airline is going to come forward and invest, they need some guarantee, or they need some certainty, I should say, about, am I going to be allowed to run this route for 3 years, 5 years, so that I can go to a financier and say, well, I have this business, I have this license, I have this arrangement, and I can therefore operate. I know that the demand is there, and the market's there. All of these things have to be put together. So it will take time. So it's not that they're not working, but obviously I think we all agree, including themselves, because they are traveling like us, you know. They're going through some of these issues like us, so they're seeing it firsthand. They know how difficult it is to get around. So our heads are definitely looking at it. CDB has been asked to lead the effort in terms of the framework, and they're trying to put some things together for the consideration of our heads.
All right, well, let's turn to our viewers right now. I understand that we have a caller online already with a question or a comment for the governor. Welcome, caller. Did that caller get impatient?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Welcome to the GBN studios. The governor is available to you.
Yes, good evening, Ms. Faria and Dr. Antoine.
Good evening.
Yes. I love your tie and your
go
socks,
ahead and listen on your phone. Can you turn the volume down on your device?
But I just want to move the conversation a bit. you talked earlier on about the importance of an ombudsman. In light of the financial and economic landscape issues, how important is the reality of consumer affairs protocol and bureau within the OECS area vis-a-vis all the challenges we are facing today? Do you think that is critical for development as nation states?
Yes, yes, I certainly do. I think there has to be a regional approach, which is why through our central bank we are taking a regional approach with the Office of Financial Conduct to create the protocols, as you put it, for consumer protection. It has to be a region-wide effort. I think we know that we've been successful with a regional central bank, one central bank for the region, and that's the same idea we want to take to this issue of financial market conduct. It is absolutely important. And part of that process is also consumer education, financial literacy, which we haven't gotten into tonight, but has to be part of. So the office that we're setting up is actually going to include not just financial conduct, but financial inclusion, to be able to ensure that consumers understand their rights, they have a basic education or understanding of literacy, and they can engage on appropriate terms. So we certainly agree with you. And I think I may have recognized the voice, and if that is who I think it is, I want to thank you, sir, for your service to the people of Grenada during your time as a very senior public servant. I'll leave that there.
The place so small, you figured out who that was.
It is.
And you know, you talked here about, call it asset. You talked about financial literacy, and one of the things I recognized when I produced the program Business Files is that people said, oh, no one is going to watch that program. It's about finance and business and economy. But there was this huge appetite, and people still today, we're off the air, but people still today ask for the program. People were so engaged and learned a lot, and there is this room for literacy and financial education, literacy in financial matters. And we've had some disasters because of that lack of financial literacy, where people have made bad investments and you know, gotten into problems because of that.
That is correct. I mean, the truth is, the Standard & Poor's did a global financial literacy survey and found that only 1 in 3 persons are financially literate. That means 2 in 3 persons are not financially literate. We are now doing, ECCB, financial literacy and inclusion survey. We've already, I think, completed Grenada. We're working through the islands to establish what is the level of financial literacy and financial inclusion in the currency union, and then to build a strategy around how we're going to help our people become more financially literate. And as I said in my film statement a few weeks ago, not just financial literacy, but we want to focus now on financial wellness and resilience. Wellness and resilience. And so expect more on that in the next few months.
Now, we have a question that's been texted in. I believe that one came in on the ECCB Connects platform. And this is, how can the cost of feed for animals be reduced? Why can there be another monopoly?
I don't know I could answer that question with any authority. I certainly think monopolies are to be discouraged. And if you have to have a monopoly, you have to have an effective regulator. Because monopolies tend to lose their way, become very inefficient, and not deliver on the mandate with which they were given. Clearly, in this period, we're challenged by the fact that we're importing fertilizer. And a big part of the input for fertilizers is natural gas. Mm-hmm. The price of that has skyrocketed. In some countries, I mean, over the last year and a half, fertilizer prices have gone up 150%. There's not a whole lot we could do other than the government's partially subsidizing. But I don't know that the answer is a monopoly. I think the answer in part is to try to buy in bulk, to try to reduce the costs. So just as how our governments have come forward or come together and purchase pharmaceuticals, certain drugs, mm-hmm. Pharmaceuticals, drugs, I don't want to confuse it with narcotics, mm-hmm. Pharmaceuticals, to help lower the cost, and as a result they are saving about 50%, I think in some cases, by doing that together through the OECS.
We've been doing it for a long time, and
but we need to expand that,
well. And I've always wondered why we are not.
Why are we not doing it for textbooks? Why are we not doing it for fertilizers? There are even some computers. There are a range of issues now. These small countries go in and negotiate price. You are at the mercy of these suppliers. We're very, very small.
At CARICOM, we're 12 million at the OECS at the OECS level. We're a big number as well. I can't remember exactly what it is.
Currency union is 650,000.
650,000 people. So, and we are 100,000 people.
110 there was.
Right. So imagine negotiating for 6 times the price that you would get.
Correct. It would make a difference. So to the person who wrote, I think the best deal is for us to try to do some bulk procurement. I think we get better, we'll have more negotiating power and we get better pricing.
Another question coming in from YouTube. Does the ECCB reserves include any gold?
No, it does not. The reserves do not include gold. That is something we have reviewed from time to time, and we are looking at it again. Our investment policy does allow us to invest in gold. Traditionally, the bank has not. And
why not?
Well, they're legacy issues. I mean, the gold goes back to the gold standard, and which of course was dropped in the 1970, 72 under Nixon. But the reality is that there has to be storage, and there are a range of issues around that and so on. But it can be done. But most central banks, certainly smaller central banks, are not in gold. Are not in gold. I think in the Caribbean, I think Guyana, because the Guyana used to have a little gold, and maybe one other country a little portion. But most of our central banks, we did a survey on that, they are not in gold. But gold is something we have to consider, and we are certainly looking to see whether that's something we will do going forward.
Okay, we have another caller on the line. Caller, welcome to the GBN studios. Hello.
Hello.
Caller, you connected to our studios. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good night to you, Calistria, and good night to the Governor.
Good evening.
Governor, I heard the Minister of Housing said on the radio, on the television once, that housing is a big challenge for the government. Will you consider in the guarantee that you mentioned to not just small businesses, but individuals, that will enable the indigenous banks to offer loans to what they term as shadow loans? Would you consider, some kind of negotiation with the heads of those banks to enable to take off some of the burden then on the government in that area? Thank you.
I'm not sure I could give you a helpful answer. I think there is significant housing needs in Grenada, and frankly in the other member countries across the currency union. Where government has land, government can help by making some of the lands available, either for a very small fee or in some cases grants, depending on the income categories. Because a lot of time when you go to a bank, the bank will ask you, they want to know, do you have land? What's the asset? Or what's your down payment? So I think if government can help some people with land where they're available, of course, land increasingly less and less government lands are available. Mostly now maybe the government estates, which is really for farming, for food. But I think where governments can make land available, that would help. In some cases, government would have to work in partnership increasingly with the banks and the private sector. I know the government is probably considering looking at some possibilities to engage private sector to do housing units in a more cost-effective way using modern technology to help bring down the cost of the housing. So part of it is access to land, but also the technology that you use to get the cost of housing down. Because in some cases, the cost is so high that people can't approach the bank for a loan to do a decent house. So you have to come up with housing solutions that are not costing $500,000 or costing $350,000. Can you get a housing solution for less? So I'm not a housing expert, caller, but I would think that those are a couple of the areas the government needs to consider, and I'm sure the government is probably starting to do that. But the housing challenge is huge. Years ago, we were talking about whether and to what extent we need to do more apartment-type buildings as opposed to standalone houses. Now, culturally, we have this expectation to build a house with a piece of land behind to do a backyard garden and to put a fence.
And a veranda close to the road so you can see what's going on.
There you go. Now, do we have the land? If we don't, and clearly, increasingly we do not, then we have to look at different housing solutions. We've seen some of that with the housing projects supported by the Chinese. So I think culturally we have to shift as well. You may have starter homes, or where people, the government you can buy it and then you can build it out over time and add on to it and so on, but you get a basic starter unit. I think we have to look at a number of things. And the financial institutions will have to be involved. But we got to get creative about how we solve some of these housing challenges in the region. That's all I can offer you. I hope that is helpful.
We have another caller on. Welcome to the GBN studios. The Governor is all yours.
Good night, Faria. Good night, Governor Antoine.
Good evening.
I have a question.
Caller, we are not hearing you very clearly. Can you speak up a bit, please?
Is it better now?
Better.
A bit, a little bit more volume. Pretend you're shouting to your neighbor over the fence.
I'll try to raise my voice. Yeah, the question is in relation to the clearing out facility. We have this situation here where people have to wait 2-3 days before a check is cleared. In fact, you can't, if you don't have an account in a bank, you can't walk in and cash a check. Are there plans to create a clearinghouse facility for banks here, if there's none? And the comment is with regard to opening up bank accounts. In Grenada, it's like pulling teeth. I walked into a bank in the United States, and I opened an account inside an hour. We can't do that in Grenada. Is that a requirement? Does the central bank mandate that banks give people these problems to open an account? Or is just the bank's policy? Thank you.
Yeah, caller, thank you. You are absolutely correct. This is a vexing issue. I am frustrated as well with this issue. And I've asked our bankers in Grenada and across the currency union to work with us, our central bank, to help resolve this issue of opening a bank account. It is simply too difficult, Kalistra, to open a bank account. That's not good enough. Now, the truth is no. Caller, no. It's not our central bank telling the banks to give you a hard time. No, quite the reverse. The banks are under pressure from international standards like the Financial Action Task Force and so on to protect against money laundering and terrorist financing. Fact. And they have to be careful because if they're not careful, they could be the risk, meaning they could lose their corresponding banking relationships. So they have been careful. But I think we've gone to an extreme, to the point now where we're hurting people. So I expect in the next few months to be able to get some recommendations from our banks in respect of this matter, and as the regulator to work with the banks to simplify the process. It may mean tweaking the law a little bit in some cases to allow us to do that, but we have to solve this. We cannot continue in this manner. We cannot continue in this manner. So I give you a commitment, caller, that we will work with the banks, the ECCB, to address this issue of opening a bank account.
And now he also asked about banks that will not clear.
So on the clearance issue, so the way the clearance system works right now, it is that it is owned by the commercial banks and the central bank. We are joint owners of the Eastern Caribbean Automated Clearinghouse system. So we already own it. What we've been trying to do is to develop it so that it's cheaper, and we're also now trying to get the credit unions access to the clearinghouse so they could do checks. The truth about the matter is that a check should not take more than 1 day to clear, but depending on which bank, depending on what time of day you deposit the check, sometimes it's still taking 2 and 3 days. And that's part of the reason why we also wanted to do Dcash, because what we were saying is that it takes too long. It takes too long. Payments, time is money. You ought to be able to make a payment and hit your account in seconds. That's what Dcash does. Within seconds, I make a payment to you and you receive it. That's the value proposition. Safer, faster, cheaper. And so I'm simply saying that we have to look creatively at how we're going to do it. And you're going to hear more about Dcash because we haven't marketed it very well yet. You're going to see a lot more of it in the new year, this end of the year and into the new year. But the answer is not more checks. I think we have to do a better job on checks, but the answer is to look for additional ways to to make payments faster, cheaper, and still safer, because checks are expensive.
But I think also, and I suspect what the caller is also asking when he talks about the checks is there at least one bank that I know of, that if you do not hold an account there, but an account holder writes you a check and you go to cash it, the bank will not honor the check unless you have an account there.
Yeah, I get that, Kalisha, and I'm aware that that happens in some cases. That is not a requirement of the central bank. We wish the banks would not do that, but the banks, and I think you should get the Bankers Association on a program and let them tell you why they're doing that and what else they could be. They're given reasons, some of which I think I understand, but some of which I don't accept. I think we have to do a better job of serving the customers. But the banks are under pressure as well in terms of compliance.
But a check is a demand that you're given this by the person whose money is there, and they say, can this money over? And they're saying, no, we're not going to do it. What excuse?
Well, their concerns are they don't know you, they don't have a profile on you in terms of money laundering, and therefore they want to do business with who they know and who they have their due diligence on.
That makes absolutely no sense. It makes
bring them on and talk to them. I am not here to defend that.
Out the window.
I am not here to defend that. I think you are well placed to ask the banks to come in and have this conversation with you and the Grenadian people, because I think both sides need to be heard. But I certainly agree with the caller that it's too difficult and we have to make it easier.
But the issue of de-risking and the corresponding banking, how, if this continues, how is it going to affect economic activity? We seem to be at the mercy of the regulations and the situation that has really very little to do with us. The issue of terrorism and money laundering and that kind of thing.
And that's why it's so vexing. We're hurting for something that is not of our own making, and frankly, where we're the least contributors. Everybody knows most of the money laundering that goes on in the world goes on in the large financial centers of the world, not in the Caribbean. I am not saying no money laundering happens in the Caribbean. I won't say that. I think money laundering happens everywhere. But certainly, most of it happens in the big financial centers.
It's like climate change. We're suffering, and we didn't cause the bulk of the problem.
Correct. So we clearly have to. We're concerned. I will say though that the purchase of the Canadian operations by our indigenous banks have helped to some extent, in the sense that our indigenous banks are now larger and therefore more attractive to the correspondent banks. So for some of these indigenous banks, the pressures on the pressure has eased because they're now larger, they're now more profitable. Because you might have been a $700 or $800 million bank, you're now a $1.5 billion bank. A lot of our indigenous banks are now billion-dollar banks. So in that sense, we have actually seen some improvements in some banks with respect to correspondent banking relations. The other thing I mentioned very briefly, I know we don't have much time, is that there's a broader discussion going on at the international level about whether and to what extent central bank digital currencies, multi-CBDCs as we would style them, could ultimately assist us in reducing our dependence on correspondent banks. But that's another subject perhaps for another day.
When you do give me a one-on-one interview on my program, The Narrative, the pension issue in Grenada, that has been a big talk, and I would have called you a million times already had you still been in the permanent secretary's chair at the Ministry of Finance on this matter. What's your take on it? Grenada now going into paying $60 million in retroactive and pension reinstated.
Well, you need to call the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance. You have a very able permanent secretary in Mike Sylvester. Call him, he will answer the question.
That's who gets all of my calls now. I'm calling him as much as I used to call you.
Very good. Well, I'm pleased. I'm pleased that we now have come to the point where this long-standing issue is being resolved. I think the previous administration had started some work there, but certainly with the ruling and the new administration's upfront commitment to move forward, and that this year, I think we are seeing finally, after many, many years, some light at the end of this tunnel. I think it is also pleasing, and I was making this comment a little earlier today, that the government of Grenada today, this government, is in a position to go forward and pay, I think, close to $60 million, I think is the number.
$60 million in the retroactive.
Without borrowing.
Amount. Yeah.
Without having to borrow. That is a testament to fiscal management. And it is a great thing, and the Grenadians should be proud that because of our collective sacrifices under that homegrown program, that we're in a position today where the state can meet its obligation to pensions, to its workers in respect of pension. It is a great thing that a government, you could have a change of government, and the treasury isn't empty. Because we took collectively, all of us in Grenada, made sacrifices to put our fiscal house in order. That is serving us well. The government is able to do a number of things because we put our fiscal house in order. And I was very pleased to hear the Prime Minister say recently that come 2023, the government is going to return to the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And I think that's important because what those buffers allow you to do is to do transformation, to be able to do the things that you want to do. If you didn't have those arrangements now, where would the pensions be paid from? You could have had the judgment paid and you have no money to pay it. But I'm glad that the government is moving on this. I commend the government for this effort, and I certainly am pleased that workers are now getting their just desserts. I will say, and it came up today as well with our social partners, we have to make sure that our people have the requisite financial counseling and support to spend their pensions well. I'm not saying that they won't.
And not just spend it well, but the savings and investment.
Invest.
Yeah.
And in fact, I shouldn't say spend because you want to invest. So I've said, I'm sure they already have plans for the money, but somebody asked me, well, what will you do with it? What should they do with it? I said, well, it's up to people, but you could pay down some debt, you could put away a rainy day fund, and you could invest in a business. Those are 3 ideas for your pension. But I'm sure financial institutions will be happy to give advice. But it's very important with this kind of money coming into the system soon that people have some guidance in terms of how they can maximize the use of their hard-earned, well-deserved pensions. Especially with the increase in scammers out there, and especially online. They're really targeting people online now. Correct. And you work hard for it, don't throw it away in foolishness. So you need guidance. Reach out where you need help. But 3 basic areas you can do. You can pay down debts, clear your mortgage if you have a mortgage. You can put aside some for the rainy day, a rainy day fund, and you can invest in a small business. So that's some starting ideas. The Prime Minister also talking about in 2023 moving to fortnightly pay at the government for government workers. Your opinion on that? Can you offer an opinion on that? I can't, meaning that, so I know the idea conceptually is to have velocity of money, more circulation in the economy, and same amount of money but faster. So essentially you're getting paid half and half, right? By the way, it's funny because I remember my first job as a bank teller, that's exactly what happened. I got paid on the 10th of the month and the 25th of the month. Half on the 10th, half on the 25th. And I'm actually on reflection, it was the same thing at the World Bank. So, if I recall, it's been 15 odd years since I left the World Bank, but I think it was split in half and you got half-half. So, I haven't looked at any research on this issue, so I don't want to speak authoritatively on it. But certainly, the idea of more money circulating faster and so on is potentially a good thing. Some people argue that they will be able to save more, but what we have to make sure that people have appropriate counseling. Because a lot of the obligations are monthly. Your mortgage is monthly. Your car loan is monthly. So you have to understand, if you're making $1,000, you get $500. You can't spend everything, and then you can't pay your car loan when the month ends. That counseling needs to be understood. You're getting half. You're getting the same at the same amount, but you're getting it divided by 2. You're getting the same amount, so if you're making $1,000 a month, you're getting $500 now and $500 later. You still have to manage those monthly obligations unless you're able to convert them to fortnightly. So there are some people who are already in Grenada, the banks for example, who are on fortnight already. But for others like the government and so on, they will have to put things in place. It can be done. A little more cost involved, but you can do the software and you can do the payroll runs and so on. But I think my bigger issue really would make sure that the appropriate counseling around that. Because that's a culture shift. And you could find that people don't understand that and get themselves tied up in financial knots. And people might think, oh, I'm actually getting twice my salary. No, they're not. And they need to be very clear about those things. And on the mortgage, if your mortgage is $200, then you want to save $100 when you get that first check. Yes. And so that you can put it with the second check, $100 on the second check, or else. Correct. Yeah. Unless your financial institution is prepared to give you the ability to pay half of your mortgage when you get your first check and half, or your payment and half. The value of that would be your interest would be coming down faster, because obviously you're cutting, so there would be value in paying your debt twice, take $100 and $100 to get the $200, because your interest accruing would actually fall. So you will save yourself money over time. That could be a benefit for people if the financial institutions are prepared to do that. Now, I am not sure. I think the government would need to engage them on that to see whether and to what extent they're prepared to do that sort of thing, so that people can get a financial benefit from it, just from servicing the debt more frequently.
We have a question here on YouTube, and it's going to be, I think, our final question for the night, maybe. It says, is there any possible way that Mr. Antoine or the ECCB can help us get back our CLICO money?
Yeah, the CLICO issue is a vexing issue. What I will say by way of update, the latest is that the governments of the ECCU have negotiated with Barbados, and Barbados has committed 37 million Barbados dollars, which is what, 40-odd million EC, as a contribution towards that. So it is nowhere close to what is owed to the policyholders of CLICO, but it is a contribution. It is something better than nothing. So the governments have been working quite assiduously on this issue. We are now working to get the money from Barbados into the ECCU, and then to be in a position to create some kind of distribution. Now, the reality is that the Barbados government has offered a 15-year bond, not cash. So what we've been discussing, and there's an agreement in principle, is to then have somebody give us cash for a discount. So they'll charge a commission, a discount for it, and then to be able to then put cash in people's hand. Okay. Because people waited so long. It's what, 13 years or whatever since this thing happened, 2009. So we want to put cash in their hands. So my expectation, caller, is, or the person who asked, is that sometime in 2023, hopefully, some payment, that payment of $37 million would be made available. The other option, if people don't want to take any discount, is to take the bond and get an interest coupon interest payment every 6 months. But you have to wait 15 years before you get the principal. And since you've already waited 13 years, I don't think most people want to wait for 15 years. So that's why we want to get cash and put in their hand. So that's beyond that, I can tell you that the governments, the ECCU, are seriously considering taking the government of Trinidad and Tobago to court through the CCJ to recover these monies. But I'll leave that for now. More will be said on that in due course. But this is a major issue and continues to occupy the attention of our heads. Prime Minister's right.
And I know after the meltdown, a lot was done to shore up regulations in financial regulations.
Yes.
But there are those who believe that it did not go far enough, that businesses in the financial service sector are still able to export the profit and invest elsewhere. I talked earlier about how all CLICO left behind was one measly building on Young Street in St. George's. Should we do more? Should governments do more in terms of regulation that says how much percentage of financial institutions have to be locally owned, similar to Canada's system in the insurance industry?
Yeah,
where there's a 51%, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, I think we certainly could and we need to do more, and I would certainly encourage us to do that. Ultimately, I mean, you need to have a combination of local and foreign. It can't be all foreign, it can't be all local. Meaning, and when I say can't be all local, is because foreign, what does foreign bring? It brings some technology, it brings some capacity, it brings some capital. But certainly in the financial sector, well, in the banking sector, that's what's happened. Essentially, you know what I said, indigenous banks control the commanding heights. Our people control our banking system now by virtue of ownership. 2/3 of the banking assets are now in indigenous hands. But I certainly think in insurance, we have a lot of local insurance companies, by the way, small. But then you have the conglomerates, you know, the regional, like a Guardian, like a Sachico, and so on. And I think we want to see more and more partnerships. We are operating within CARICOM, so there are rights of establishment in terms of free movement of capital and so on, which we have to respect. But the bottom line is, I take the point that we need to encourage more local ownership of our financial sector. And I certainly I would want to see that happen more.
Governor, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me. I believe we are out of time. It's been a very interesting conversation. It was really good to see you again. I had not seen you for a few years. Last time I think it was at an independence celebrations when you came home after you went to St. Kitts. It's been a pleasure, and I want to wish you good luck as you continue to provide guidance to our governments on the financial systems in the Caribbean and our economic development. Thanks for being on with me.
Thank you, Kalisha. It's been my pleasure, and let me just say to the Grenadian people, it's my privilege to serve you as Governor of the Central Bank. It's a job we take very seriously, and we continue to listen to your concerns to see how we could help. I do want to thank all of you who've given us the benefit of your counsel time this week for what has been a very, very interesting, very engaging country outreach. Thank you very much to everyone, including the Governor of Grenada, and my own staff, our country manager, and all of our ECCB team. It's been a very good few days, and I look forward to the engagements for the rest of the week.
Thank you, Governor. This has been a conversation with the Governor, Timothy N.G. Antoine, Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, and he's on his outreach tour across the ECCU. I'm Kalisra Faria, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here at the GBN studios. Goodbye, everybody.